Greetings and welcome to Conversations with David Ibarra. Today I'm delighted to have as our guest Gregory Thompson, former historian from the University of Utah. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, David.
Well, today I want to just dive right in. I have had the pleasure to spend some time with you. I met you when you interviewed my brother Mickey and our family as he donated his memorabilia to the University of Utah, where it's housed under the Mickey Ibarra Papers. But tell me about your beginning. Tell me about you.
Thank you. I'm a kid from Durango, Colorado.
Wow, I love that place.
It's in the severe corners of the Southwest, Four Corners states, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Fairly isolated locale. I wasn't born there. I was born basically as a product of the naval yards in Bremerton, Washington during World War II. And then my family moved on and returned to Colorado, southwest Colorado, where both my mother and father grew up. My father in northern New Mexico, my mother in the southwestern corner of Colorado. So my real home is Durango and my native beginnings and development. I went through school, public school, and left when I just barely turned 18 to go to college, and I went to St. Lawrence University in upstate New York for a year. Essentially, one, obviously to go to school, and two, I had been a competing skier during my junior years in both junior high and high school, and I was there at St. Lawrence in part on scholarship to support the ski team and become a member of that. In those days, freshmen couldn't compete, and in those days, in the world of skiing, you skied 4 events. You skied cross-country, jumping, alpine slalom, and alpine downhill or giant slalom. And so I did those things, but my real passport to success was cross-country and a little jumping. I went to St. Lawrence, and after the first year, I left St. Lawrence, came back to Durango, Colorado, and went for a year at Fort Lewis College, the community college, and then moved on to Colorado Springs. To Fort Collins at Colorado State University. And there I completed a BS degree in business, administration, and finance, and had thought I might become a banker. Decided it was too boring, and didn't. I only looked at it. I didn't dip my finger into it, but it just didn't fit well for me, I thought. I came back to Fort Lewis and took a second undergraduate degree, a BA, in history of the West. And I also went through their educational program for teaching secondary level high school public education teaching, and was certified to do that in Colorado. Before I left to do that, I had networked with a person who became my lifelong mentor, who was here at the University of Utah in the Department of History and associated with a center called the American West Center. It's a research arm of the university, and over its 50-plus years of existence has focused heavily on American Indian, Hispanic, and other immigrant groups who have come into Utah and the surrounding area to develop their story and their history. The first major project was a Doris Duke personally funded initiative called the Doris Duke American Indian Oral History Project, which its mission was to attempt to document the history of indigenous tribal peoples through their own voice. And that's what really got me to Utah, was that program, because there was a job there, and I could get into grad school. So I took a master's and a PhD here at the University of Utah. All the while I was working in the American West Center, and both my master's degrees and my PhD degree were in the West, American West, the history of the American West, and more specifically, American Indian history of the West. I focused on one of three tribes of which I grew up with in the Durango area, and that was the Southern Utes. We have Ute tribal groups in Utah, and Colorado has three combined groups that live in the very furthest corner of Colorado. And so my thesis was a history of the establishing of the reservation of the Southern Ute Indians. And then I looked at a more national topic for my dissertation, and that was the development of the American Indian policy, federal policy, during the latter part of the 19th century. Out of that, and my involvement with the center continued for 15 years, from the time I arrived in 1967 to when I left in 1983. We worked with tribal groups located on reservations across the West, developing tribal histories and educational packages for tribes to take to the school systems surrounding their reservation lands and help the schools develop a insert program for their history classes.
Now, am I wrong in saying this? A lot of that history has not been invited by mainstream curriculum.
That's the most gentle way to say it.
I'm learning. I'm getting older.
You're correct.
What kind of pushback did you get by doing this work, by acknowledging that almost everybody else other than the indigenous people that were here are immigrants?
That's correct. And there was a lot of pushback. And we worked with all of the major tribes and the colony groups in Nevada. 5 tribes.
Tell me, that's a word not often used. I know what it means, the colony groups. Explain exactly what that means when you're called a colony. A colonist.
So in Nevada, the major groups have reservations. And but around the communities throughout Nevada, they're developed Indian groups, mostly from the major tribes, but they moved and were part of the urban scene, even if it was just a small community. And so they developed their own association and grouping structure to expand their capabilities and improve their conditions in those settings. So you would find them around Sparks. You would find them, which would be partly for Reno, Las Vegas had same. And you just go across Nevada, and there are these. There are 20. I believe there's 23 of them. I think I have that right. Been a long time since I've looked at that.
It's interesting. People of color refer to white America as the colonists.
That's right. That's right.
And sometimes people go, what does that mean? But when you look at history, it makes very good sense. It's not derogatory. Right. It makes very good sense, but it's sensitive when you bring in the original Americas and want to save that history. For whatever reason, it is painful, and some would just say, why don't we just forget that it ever happened?
Yes, we ran into a lot of that constantly. But Floyd O'Neill, Dr. Floyd O'Neill, was the person that I mentioned as my mentor, is the person that got me to Utah, was the director for field operations for the American West Center, and later became director of the center itself. He was an incredible educator, had taught in Price and in Helper and the K-12 initiatives, was head of the Education Association for Teachers in Utah, as your brother was. And he had this background, and he was a brilliant historian and scholar and teacher, a wonderful teacher in the classroom. And so we developed this initiative to teach American Indian history through the eyes of essentially the history programs. They usually weren't called that in the structure of curriculum for the secondary level, and we sought federal funding, foundation funding, but we raised all the money to do it. So it gave me a very interesting background. I came to Utah to be a regular academic historian in a major academic department on a university campus. And this took me off into the area of what's called public historian, public history area. And I never really looked back. But I got to do all those things because I was at the University of Utah.
Tell me about how you ended up at the University of Utah. You came here to do this work, and then how did you end up an historian at the University of Utah?
So I was a student at Fort Lewis the second time, and seeking this additional degree, and also teaching certification for public school teaching. And there was an emergency at Fort Lewis the summer that I was there. The professor who was to teach part of the history classes for the summer had a ill father, later died, lived in New Orleans. So he left, and the chair, which I'd gotten to know, Bob Delaney, who headed their history program, sought a professor or an individual who could come and immediately on two weeks' notice, pick up 4 classes for a summer program, which was a shortened program. So you taught a lot in a shorter time. And Floyd was identified by the then Department Chair of History, David E. Miller, as the person to do it. Floyd had been quite ill. He hadn't really recovered. He didn't think he could do it, but Bob talked him into it. And he came over, and it so happened I was actually working as a student in the library then, and this chap kept coming in and out of the library asking us to buy books, lots of books. That was very unusual for that school. And my friend, who also worked in the library, we decided we wanted to meet this guy, and So we invited him for coffee in the evening because he was always on campus working in the nights. And that led into a friendship. Later in that, the coming academic year, I was still at Fort Lewis, and there was a call for suggestions for a speaker for the History Club. And I suggested we bring Floyd in. And they agreed to do it. So I went out to the airport, met him, brought him in, and he had been tutoring me all along, trying to help me get ready to go to graduate school and in history. And so when I took him back to the airport and said goodbye, he said, hang on. We might be cooking something up that would involve you. And about a month and a half later, I got a call from him. And he said, you still interested in coming to Utah? And I said, you bet. And 2 weeks later, on April 23rd, a friend of mine who was headed up to Montana to fight fires dropped me off basically at the University of Utah, and here I was. And I never left. I have never left.
That is cool.
And that's what got me here. And then the center directed my career in a very major way. And when it came time, there was I needed to move on. Mm-hmm. And so in 1983, actually late 82, the position of the head of special collections for the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah came open. Dr. Everett Cooley retired, and they were looking for somebody, and I was strongly encouraged to apply. And I did, and I got the job. And my title over time became Associate Dean for Special Collections for the J. Willard Marriott Library.
Wow.
So I was on the administrative team for the library, but my real work was developing special collections.
So tell me, let's move into special collections. How many have you been involved in?
Well, special collections is put together of several units. One is the manuscript collection, which you have been involved with Mickey and his papers, the donation of his papers. The other is they are built around mediums. So the visual part, motion, film, and still photographs is a separate collection. A book collection that relates to the West, Utah, the Mormons in the West, and it's been expanded now. It's opened up a little more than that. And then a university archives and records management program. The head of special collections manages all of the records for the University of Utah that are related to the administrative or sponsored research initiatives. It's a huge collection, about 50,000 linear feet of material. Wow. That's the paper side, not the digital side. And then there are two other parts. The rare book collection, which serves the entire university with acquiring the rare books that have defined the intellectual ness of the Americas, Europe, Asia, so forth and so on. And so that collection, it's about 90,000 volumes now. When I came, it was 3,000 volumes.
Wow.
And
so you have a life of collecting stuff and housing it at the...
And the final piece was an academic program of teaching interested artists and art students and others on hand press printing and all the elements of it. So that we built that as a new addition to the program. It's very successful and continues the academic side is under the College of Fine Arts and the Department of Art and Art History. So the real job is one, to collect, and I built umbrella topics under which we would function. So there's definition and a mission statement and a subject focus, and there are 9 or 10 of them, and they're pretty broad. And then the other part of the initiative, one, you have to go out and find those papers and convince the individual or the corporation or the nonprofit to give you their records. And you take those records, and my colleagues that I worked with were skilled professionals in organizing and defining the collections in a way they became instantly available through registers or defining guides, and organized so that people could come and use them. Because the Marriott Library always struggles to be funded at a level that's appropriate for a major one university, level university, research university, you have to raise money. So I spent a lot of time raising money, and I raised a lot of money and to get the program going.
Wow.
Because neither the library or the institution really could afford what we were doing.
Well, let me ask you this. Of the, like my brothers, the Mickey Ibarra papers, and you spent, I don't know how many hours interviewing on just those, but I assume it's a great deal. How many of those types of papers have you been involved with in collecting the history so that it could be saved forever, and that experience, that knowledge, be transferred to anyone who wanted to go up and check them out and listen?
When I came to the library in '83, as I recall, we had about 250, 300 manuscript collections, individual collections. We had a set of photographic collections, no film, and we had about 3,000 volumes that were labeled rare. When I left a year and a half ago, we had very close to 90,000 volumes.
Wow.
And we had about 4,000, maybe a little less. It was a movable number of manuscript collections, ranging from a couple of files to 700-800 boxes, cartons of records in size.
Wow.
And so each one had its own, of course, size and dimensions. And then where the photographic side numbers in the millions, and our film collection is I don't have an exact number for now, but it's in the thousands.
Wow. Tell me, as we get close to the end of the program, I do not want to miss, tell me your 3 favorite interviews. Now, this may be hard, but tell me what stands out. Maybe it's not 3, maybe it's 4, but what stands out that you always remember and come back to and say, boy, I'm glad I participated in collecting these memories?
One that comes to mind instantly, and you would be familiar with the interviewee, is a set of interviews I did with Rocco Siciliano. And he was Rocco to his friends.
And for the audience that doesn't know the connection, my mother remarried a Jack Siciliano, which was Rocco's first cousin.
That's right. And Rocco was the first of the Italian community in Salt Lake to go to the university. He graduated from the university while he was training as an officer for World War II at the university. So he was double dipping, so to speak, and he had to talk the dean of students into allowing him to do it. But he got his degree and then went off to be a member of the 10th Mountain Division, which some people that hear this will recognize, one of the major divisions that fought in Italy during World War II, from toe to top. And that, with Rocco, the collection, his collection was sizable and very important. He had worked in 2 administrations, one in the White House and one as a cabinet member, and so his involvement was major. He became an attorney, and he said to me one day when I was in his office in Beverly Hills, "My kids want me to write my story. I don't know how to write my story." And I said, "Rocco, I do." And I said, "Here's what we're going to do." And we did a set of interviews. I don't know how many hours, lots. And every time I could get to L.A., I'd carve time to go meet with Rocco, or if he came here, which he did often, we would carve time for an interview. And then I worked with him to find an individual to help take the transcripts and turn it into a autobiography. And he provided the funding to do that, did it through the library and special collections. And that produced a book published by the University of Utah called Walking on Sand.
I have a copy, and it is signed.
Good. That was one thing I was to ask you. Yeah. So that's one. I've been working with Spence Eccles more recently over quite a long period of time with the idea of getting a set of transcripts. They're mostly done and in place. He's also had working with him a young historian from Stanford who has been kind of sketching out what the story should be, and they're to the point now where they're beginning to look for a major writer to help build that the story of Spence Eccles and the Eccles Empire.
Yes,
and it's wonderful. I love doing my interviews with the Ibarra family, you included, because I got to go quite deep into the history of the Ibarra clan, and that included your father. I did a wonderful interview in Mickey's office in Washington, D.C. I interviewed your mother and here in Salt Lake, and of course I've interviewed Mickey either in his office in Washington, D.C., or when he was out here. Whenever we could get time, we'd sit down, usually at the library here, and get an hour in. And we had just completed a set of interviews with you. And it is fun. It's interesting work because it allows me to get to know the interviewee better than their family know them in almost every occasion. And that's true for most of what I've done. But it's across a number of topics, and often it's associated with those who have given their papers to the library, so that I tell people the oral history process is putting the meat on the skeleton bones which are their paper collection, their paper collection in special collections. And the pieces together are quite dynamic.
Well, as we look at the Mickey Ibarra papers, it is an unbelievable piece of work. And again, I encourage everybody that visit the library on major universities, and there's stuff there that are treasures that you can gain the knowledge of another and transfer that knowledge to yourself to be used. My last question I have for you today, what next?
I would like to make the statement as I lead into that I got to work with some of the best people in the world. My colleagues who helped do all this we've been talking about, and who also staffed the other parts of the Marriott Library, and the deans and directors who were the leader of the institution, the agency, have been amazing people. And in the sense of what you work with, one of the approaches that I took was everybody was collegial, and everybody I attempted to give enough room so they could be really creative, and they could tell me what had to be done. And my job then was to find the resources. So now I've been a year and a half retired with quotes around it, and because I was in the position so long, I'm closely identified with it, and people have continued to come to me for help in getting their papers in and collections dealt with. So I've done that. I also brought a $200,000 grant into special collections as I was going out the door, and I've remained involved in that grant for 2 years, and there'll be another 6 months before it's done. It's a Doris Duke grant, by the way, that the charitable organization, Doris Duke, came back to see how they could improve access to the collection that was built in 1967 to 1972 that got me to Utah. Mm-hmm. And I have a major project of that I'm trying to push forward, and that is to take that thesis I did on the Southern Utes and bring it up to date with the scholarship and bring it out to our wider audience than has seen it. That piece of work became a valuable legal tool for use by the tribe in claiming their Colorado River compact rights, water rights.
Right.
It was called the Animas La Plata Project, and their legal team told me on multiple occasions how important that thesis had been. It probably was far more important than my dissertation has ever been. But I'm trying to get that up to shape, see if the U Press might be interested in publishing it. And I've been working on several other projects. I've been working with a Colorado group currently that is exploring in great detail the journey of Dominguez and Escalante in 1776 out of Santa Fe and Abiquiu, New Mexico, into Colorado, across into Utah, and down essentially the river to the Pueblo of Zuni and back to Santa Fe. And I was involved in a major bicentennial project to work on that. We did that in the 70s, and so now I've come back to that.
Very good.
Working with the western slope of Colorado group.
So then it's safe to say that retired, in quotes, is probably pivoting to some different projects, but there's probably no retirement in you.
It's been a pretty busy time, and my wife will occasionally make comment that thought you retired, but that's me.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you. Oftentimes, and I think in a different conversation that we've had, it took a long time to gain the wisdom you have, and to continue to use it and share it is a gift to all of us. I want to thank you for being a guest on our program today, and that concludes Conversations with David Ibarra. I'd like to ask all listeners to go on our channel on YouTube, Conversations with David Ibarra. If you like this program, please register on our YouTube channel and like us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.